The sound of gunfire echoed through the canyon as Penelope Kincaid pressed herself flat against the red rock wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. 3 men on horseback thundered past her hiding spot, their shots wild and angry, aimed at the young Navajo woman who had just saved her from their drunken advances outside the trading post. She watched in horror as her rescuer disappeared into the maze of sandstone formations, the riders losing ground with every turn. Penelope knew she should run back to town, back to the safety of the mercantile where she worked, but something kept her rooted to the spot, waiting and hoping that the brave woman who had intervened would emerge unharmed. It was the spring of 1877, and Penelope had been in the Arizona Territory for only 3 months, having traveled west from Philadelphia after her parents died of fever. The Colorado mining town of Telluride had been her intended destination, but her stagecoach had broken an axle near the small settlement of Canyon Springs, forcing her to stay and work until she could afford passage north. The Arizona desert was nothing like the green hills of Pennsylvania, and the people here lived by rules she was still learning to understand. The Navajo traded with the white settlers, but there was always tension, always an undercurrent of mistrust that could explode into violence without warning. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as silence finally settled over the canyon. Penelope ventured out from her hiding place, her blue cotton dress already dusty and stained from the ordeal. She made her way back toward the trading post, her legs shaking beneath her skirts. As she rounded a large boulder, she nearly collided with a tall figure coming from the opposite direction. "Whoa there, miss." The man caught her shoulders to steady her, his hands gentle but firm. He was young, perhaps 25, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water. A worn cowboy hat shaded his face, and a bandana hung loose around his neck. His buckskin shirt and worn denim pants marked him as someone who spent his days working cattle, not mining silver or selling dry goods. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over her with genuine concern. "No, There were men, and a Navajo woman helped me, and they chased her." Penelope's words tumbled out in a rush, the cowboy's expression darkened. "The Wilcox brothers. They've been causing trouble all week, drinking rotgut and looking for a fight." He glanced toward the canyon where the riders had disappeared. "The woman who helped you, did you see which way she went?" "Into the rocks, toward the east." Penelope pointed with a trembling hand. The cowboy nodded once, decisively. "You get yourself back to town, miss. Stay off the main road and keep to the buildings. I will handle this." Before Penelope could respond, he was moving past her with long, purposeful strides. She watched him go, noticing the rifle slung across his back and the confident way he navigated the rough terrain. Something told her he was more than just a ranch hand, that he knew these lands and their people better than most white men did. She made her way back to Canyon Springs, as the cowboy had instructed, taking the longer route that kept her close to the adobe buildings clustered around the trading post. The settlement was small, perhaps 60 permanent residents, with another 100 or so passing through each month on their way to somewhere else. Penelope rented a tiny room above the mercantile, where she helped the owner, Mrs. Henderson, with inventory and customers 6 days a week. "Lord have mercy, child. What happened to you?" Mrs. Henderson rushed from behind the counter when Penelope stumbled through the door, dust-covered and still pale from fright. Penelope explained the encounter, and Mrs. Henderson's weathered face grew stern. "Those Wilcox boys need to be run out of the territory. No good comes from men who got nothing but whiskey in their veins and meanness in their hearts." She poured water from a clay pitcher into a tin cup and pressed it into Penelope's hands. You drink this and go upstairs to rest. I can manage the store for the rest of today." But Penelope found she could not rest. She paced her small room, her mind replaying the afternoon's events. The Navajo woman had been younger than she first appeared, perhaps only 18 or 19, with intelligent dark eyes and traditional dress that included a beautiful silver and turquoise necklace. When the Wilcox brothers had cornered Penelope outside the trading post, making crude suggestions and blocking her path, the young Navajo woman had simply walked between them and said something in her own language that made them turn their anger on her instead. She had created the distraction Penelope needed to get away, and now she might be hurt or worse because of it. The sun was setting when Penelope heard boots on the wooden stairs outside her door. She opened it to find the cowboy from earlier, his hat in his hands, his expression tired but satisfied. "The woman is safe," he said without preamble. "She made it back to her family's hogan about 5 miles east of here. The Wilcox brothers gave up the chase and headed south, probably to sleep off their drunk in some arroyo." Relief flooded through Penelope. "Thank you. Thank you so much for checking on her," the cowboy nodded. "Name is Yates Ashford. I work cattle for the Bar T Ranch north of here, but I am in town buying supplies." He hesitated, as if weighing his next words. "The woman you met today is called Pretty Moon. Her family trades with the mercantile regular-like. She wanted me to tell you that you are brave for standing your ground before she intervened." "Brave?" Penelope shook her head. "I was terrified. She was the brave one. Sometimes being brave means being scared and not running anyway." Yates Ashford turned his hat in his hands. "Miss, I do not mean to speak out of turn, but you should be careful in town when those brothers are around. They've been stirring up trouble between the settlers and the Navajo, and it would not take much to turn bad feelings into worse." Penelope studied the cowboy's face, noting the concern in his creek water eyes. "You know the Navajo well, Mr. Ashford." "Just Yates, miss. And yes, I have been in the territory for 8 years now. Came west after the war ended looking for work and wide open spaces. The Navajo here, they are good people trying to live on land that keeps getting carved up and handed out to folks who got no understanding of it." He met her gaze directly. Pretty Moon's family, they lost 3 children to the long walk back in the 60s, when the army forced the Navajo to march to Bosque Redondo. Her ma and pa, they are survivors, and they raised their daughter to be strong and smart. She speaks some English, but not much. Mostly she keeps to her own people. "I wish I could thank her properly," Penelope said softly. Yates was quiet for a moment, then said, "The Navajo will be at the trading post tomorrow morning, like they are every Friday. Pretty Moon's father brings wool and blankets to sell. If you are working, you will likely see her then." He bid her good evening and descended the stairs, leaving Penelope with a strange mix of emotions she could not quite name. She had come west expecting adventure, but finding mostly hard work and loneliness. Now, in the span of one afternoon, her world had expanded to include a brave Navajo woman and a thoughtful cowboy who seemed to move between both cultures with ease. The next morning dawned clear and hot, as most mornings did in the Arizona Territory. Penelope helped Mrs. Henderson open the mercantile, sweeping the wooden floor and arranging goods on the shelves. Around 9 o'clock, several Navajo families arrived with goods to trade. Penelope recognized Pretty Moon immediately, walking beside an older man who carried bundles of woven blankets. Their eyes met across the store, and Pretty Moon smiled. She said something to her father in Navajo, then approached Penelope while he conducted business with Mrs. Henderson. Up close, Penelope could see that Pretty Moon was indeed close to her own age of 22, with a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged in the world. Pretty Moon spoke in Navajo, her voice melodic and certain. Penelope spread her hands helplessly, wishing she understood. The young Navajo woman thought for a moment, then touched her own chest and said, "Pretty Moon." Then she touched Penelope's arm with a questioning look. "Penelope," she replied, touching her own chest. "Penelope Kincaid." Pretty Moon repeated the name carefully, stumbling a bit over the syllables but getting close enough. She smiled again, then made a gesture that clearly indicated Penelope should follow her outside. Curious, Penelope glanced at Mrs. Henderson, who nodded her permission. Outside in the morning sun, Pretty Moon led Penelope to where several Navajo women were sitting in the shade of the trading post's awning, working on various crafts. One older woman was weaving a rug on a small portable loom, her fingers moving with practiced speed. Pretty Moon spoke to her, and the woman looked up at Penelope with keen, assessing eyes. She said something that made Pretty Moon laugh, then gestured for Penelope to sit. For the next hour, Penelope watched the women work and tried to communicate through gestures and the few English words that Pretty Moon knew. She learned that the older woman was Pretty Moon's mother, called Weaving Woman, and that the family lived in a traditional hogan with Pretty Moon's father and two younger brothers. The boys were off with the sheep. Pretty Moon explained through elaborate hand motions and broken English, learning to be shepherds like their father. When it was time for the Navajo families to leave, Pretty Moon touched Penelope's hand and said something in her language that sounded like a promise. Penelope wished desperately that she could understand, could speak back in words that would bridge the gap between their worlds. She watched them go, their wagons and horses kicking up dust on the road east. "That was something special," Mrs. Henderson said when Penelope came back inside. "Pretty Moon does not usually take to white folks, not after everything her family been through. You must have made an impression." "I want to learn her language," Penelope said suddenly, surprising herself with the intensity of her desire. "Is there anyone in town who could teach me Navajo?" Mrs. Henderson pursed her lips thoughtfully. "Well, there is Yates Ashford. He speaks it near fluent from what I hear. Spent years working alongside Navajo ranch hands, even lived with a family for a spell when he first came to the territory. But I do not know if he would have time to teach, what with his work at the bar tea." The idea took root in Penelope's mind and would not let go. That evening, after the store closed, she walked to the small saloon where Mrs. Henderson had mentioned Yates often took his supper. She found him at a corner table, eating beef stew and cornbread. He stood when he saw her, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Kincaid, is everything all right?" "I need to ask you something," Penelope said, then hesitated, suddenly aware of how forward she was being. A proper Philadelphia lady would never approach a man in a saloon, would never make such a bold request. But Philadelphia was far behind her now, and the rules of that old life seemed less important with every passing day. Yates pulled out a chair for her. "Sit down and ask. I will help if I can." Penelope sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I want to learn to speak Navajo. Mrs. Henderson said you are fluent. Would you be willing to teach me?" He studied her for a long moment, his creek water eyes searching her face. "Why? Most white folks in the territory got no interest in learning native tongues. They figure everyone should speak English and be done with it." "Because Pretty Moon helped me when she did not have to, and I want to be able to thank her in her own words," Penelope said honestly. "Because I am tired of only understanding half of what happens around me, of being isolated by language and ignorance. Because—" She trailed off, not quite able to articulate the deeper longing she felt to belong to this harsh, beautiful land and to understand all its people. Yates sat back down, a slow smile spreading across his face. "All right then, Miss Kincaid. I will teach you Navajo on one condition." "What is that?" "You got to practice it regular, not just learn a few words and quit when it gets hard. The language is complicated, with sounds English does not have. It will take real work and dedication." "I am not afraid of hard work," Penelope assured him. They arranged to meet 3 evenings a week after Penelope finished at the mercantile. Yates would come to town on those days and give her lessons in the shade behind the trading post, where they could practice without drawing too much attention. Mrs. Henderson agreed to let Penelope use the time, understanding that knowing Navajo would actually help with trade negotiations. Their first lesson began the following Tuesday evening. Yates started with basic greetings and common phrases, carefully pronouncing each word and having Penelope repeat them until she came close to the right sounds. The language had a musical quality that she found beautiful, with soft consonants and flowing vowels that seemed to echo the landscape around them. "Yati," Yates said, which meant hello or good morning. The apostrophe is a glottal stop, like a catch in your throat. Penelope tried several times before getting it approximately right, and Yates nodded encouragingly. "Good. Now, ahehi means thank you. That is probably the most important word you will need with Pretty Moon." They worked through basic vocabulary as the sun set and the desert air began to cool. Yates was patient but exacting, correcting her pronunciation until she wanted to scream in frustration. But she had promised not to quit when it got hard, so she kept trying. By the end of the evening, she could manage a handful of greetings and simple phrases. "You did well for a first lesson," Yates said as they walked back toward the front of the trading post. "Most folks give up when they realize how different Navajo is from English." "How long did it take you to learn?" Penelope asked. "I am still learning," he admitted. "But I could hold a basic conversation after about 6 months of daily practice. Took a couple years before I was really fluent." He glanced at her. "What I am saying is, do not expect to master this overnight. Language is like anything else worth doing. It takes time and patience." As spring turned to early summer, Penelope threw herself into learning Navajo with single-minded determination. She practiced vocabulary while stocking shelves at the mercantile, whispered phrases to herself as she lay in bed at night, and spent every lesson with Yates absorbing as much as she could. He proved to be an excellent teacher, breaking down complex grammar into understandable pieces and never making her feel foolish when she stumbled over words. Pretty Moon and her family came to the trading post every Friday, and Penelope began greeting them in Navajo. At first, Pretty Moon looked surprised, then delighted. She would respond in her own language, speaking slowly so Penelope could understand. Through these brief exchanges, a friendship began to grow between the two young women. One Friday in late June, Pretty Moon invited Penelope to visit her family's hogan. Yates, who happened to be at the trading post buying rope, offered to ride out with her to make sure she found the place safely. Penelope accepted gratefully, borrowing Mrs. Henderson's gentle mare for the journey. They rode east into the desert country, following a narrow trail that wound through red rock formations and scattered juniper trees. Yates rode easily, completely at home in the saddle, while Penelope did her best to match his relaxed posture. He had been raised on a farm in Missouri before the war, he told her as they rode, and had learned to ride almost before he could walk. "What brought you west after the war?" Penelope asked, genuinely curious about the quiet cowboy who had become such an important part of her new life. Yates was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I fought for the Union, spent 3 years watching men die over politics and pride. When it was over, I could not go back to that farm, could not settle into the life my pa wanted for me. Everything felt too small, too confining after what I had seen. He adjusted his hat against the sun. I heard the territories were wild and open, that a man could make something of himself out here if he was willing to work, so I came west and never looked back. Do you miss Missouri? Sometimes I miss the green of it, the way rain smells in spring. But this land has its own beauty once you learn to see it. The Navajo taught me that. They see the sacred in every rock and plant, every creature that walks or flies. It changed the way I look at the world. They arrived at Pretty Moon's family hogan as the sun reached its zenith. The traditional dwelling was an octagonal structure made of wooden poles and mud, with a doorway facing east according to Navajo custom. Pretty Moon emerged when she heard the horses, her face lighting up when she saw Penelope. She called something in Navajo, and her mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her skirt. What followed was one of the most memorable afternoons of Penelope's life. Pretty Moon's family welcomed her with genuine warmth, offering her food and water and a shaded place to sit. Penelope used her growing Navajo vocabulary to communicate, stumbling over words but managing to convey basic ideas. Yates helped translate when things got too complicated, but he mostly stayed in the background, letting Penelope and Pretty Moon connect on their own terms. Pretty Moon showed Penelope how to weave on a traditional loom, guiding her hands through the motions with patient encouragement. They laughed together when Penelope's stitches came out crooked, and Pretty Moon gently corrected her technique. In those shared moments of laughter and learning, language barriers seemed to dissolve, replaced by something deeper and more fundamental. As the afternoon wore on, Penelope realized that Yates was having a long conversation with Pretty Moon's father in fluent Navajo. The two men sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, discussing topics that seemed serious based on their expressions. She caught fragments of words she recognized, something about water rights and grazing lands, the eternal struggles that defined life in the territory. When it was time to leave, Pretty Moon hugged Penelope and spoke in careful English. "You are my friend. You come back, yes?" "Yes," Penelope agreed, her throat tight with emotion. "Ahee, thank you for everything." On the ride back to Canyon Springs, Yates was quieter than usual. Penelope finally asked what he and Pretty Moon's father had been discussing so intently. "Trouble brewing," Yates said grimly. "The territorial government is talking about moving boundaries again, shrinking Navajo lands to make room for more settlers and miners. Pretty Moon's father is worried they will be forced to move their hogan, leave the grazing lands their sheep depend on." He shook his head. "It is the same story over and over. Treaties get signed and then broken whenever white folks decide they want something the Navajo have." "That is not right," Penelope said hotly. "No, it is not. But right and wrong do not seem to matter much out here, not when there is money to be made and land to be taken." Yates looked at her seriously. "You are learning the language, getting to know the people. That is good, that is important. But you should know that it might make some white folks see you different, might cause you trouble. I do not care what those people think." A smile tugged at the corner of Yates's mouth. "You are braver than you give yourself credit for, Miss Kincaid. That Philadelphia polish is wearing off quick." As summer deepened, Penelope's language skills improved dramatically. She could now hold conversations in Navajo, discussing daily life and trading stories with Pretty Moon during the Friday visits to the mercantile. Yates continued their lessons 3 times a week, pushing her to understand more complex grammar and expand her vocabulary. She found herself looking forward to those evenings more than she wanted to admit, not just for the language practice, but for the easy companionship that had developed between them. Yates told her stories about his years in the territory, about learning to track animals from Navajo hunters and surviving a winter snowstorm in the high country by remembering the lessons a medicine man had taught him. He spoke about the land with reverence and about the Navajo with respect that bordered on admiration. Penelope found herself seeing him not just as a teacher, but as a man of principle and depth, someone who had chosen to build bridges between cultures instead of burning them. One evening in late July, as they finished a lesson on verb conjugations, Yates said, "You know, you speak Navajo better than most of the white folks who have lived here for decades. Pretty Moon's father told me last week that you are learning fast because you listen with your heart, not just your ears." Penelope felt her cheeks warm with pleasure at the compliment. "I had a good teacher. You had determination." Yates stood, brushing dust from his pants. "There is a Navajo gathering next month, a ceremony to bless the summer crops and give thanks for rain. Pretty Moon's family invited me, and they said I should bring you if you are willing to come." "I would love to," Penelope said without hesitation. The gathering was held in a wide canyon about 15 miles east of Canyon Springs, where several Navajo families had planted corn and squash in the fertile bottomland. Yates and Penelope rode out on a Friday afternoon, planning to camp nearby and attend the ceremony the next day. Mrs. Henderson had given her blessing for Penelope to miss a day of work, understanding that the opportunity was too important to pass up. They made camp near a small spring as the sun set, and Yates built a fire to ward off the cooling night air. Penelope had never slept outside before, and the vast expanse of stars overhead left her breathless. There were so many, thick as spilled salt across black velvet, and they seemed close enough to touch. "First time sleeping under stars?" Yates asked, noting her wonder. "Yes. In Philadelphia, you could barely see stars through all the smoke and city lights. This is—" She trailed off, unable to find words adequate to describe the beauty above them. "Humbling," Yates supplied. "That is what the Navajo would say. The stars remind us how small we are, how much bigger the world is than our little concerns." He poured coffee from a battered pot heating on the fire's edge. "But they also remind us that we are part of something vast and beautiful, connected to everything else in ways we cannot always see." They talked late into the night, conversation flowing as easily as the coffee. Yates told her about his family back in Missouri, his 3 sisters who had married local boys and his brother who had died at Shiloh. Penelope shared memories of her parents, the way her father would read poetry aloud on Sunday evenings, and how her mother had taught her to see beauty in small things, a perfectly formed rose or the pattern of frost on a window. "I wish they could have seen me now," Penelope said softly. "They always worried I was too timid, too afraid to take risks. But out here, I feel like I am becoming someone different, someone stronger." "You were always strong," Yates said quietly. "You just needed room to grow into it." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted in the air between them. Penelope felt her breath catch, awareness prickling across her skin. She had grown fond of Yates over the months they had spent together, but she had told herself it was just friendship, just gratitude for his teaching. Now, seeing the way he looked at her in the firelight, she wondered if she had been fooling herself. Yates seemed to feel it too, because he cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "We should get some sleep. The ceremony starts early tomorrow." He had brought 2 bedrolls, and he laid them out on opposite sides of the fire with proper propriety. Penelope settled into hers, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant call of an owl and the whisper of wind through sage. Sleep was a long time coming, her mind too full of confusing thoughts and unfamiliar feelings. The next morning dawned clear and already warm. They rode to the canyon where the ceremony would be held, arriving to find dozens of Navajo families gathered in a wide meadow near the planted fields. Pretty Moon spotted them immediately and ran over, greeting Penelope with a hug and rapid Navajo that made her laugh. She says you look like you did not sleep well, and she wants to know if Yates snores like a bear. Yates translated with a grin. "Tell her I was too busy looking at the stars to sleep," Penelope replied in Navajo, pleased when Pretty Moon understood without need for translation. The ceremony itself was beautiful and deeply moving. A medicine man sang prayers while families brought offerings of corn pollen and turquoise, asking for blessings on their crops and protection from drought. Penelope did not understand all the words, but she felt the reverence and hope woven through every gesture and song. These were people intimately connected to the land and its cycles, people who understood that survival depended on respecting the balance of nature. After the ceremony, there was feasting and dancing. Penelope sat with Pretty Moon and several other young Navajo women, sharing food and conversation. She was surprised to find how much she could understand now, how natural it felt to think in Navajo instead of constantly translating from English in her head. The women asked her about life in Philadelphia, about why she had come west, and they shared their own stories of family and tradition. Pretty Moon leaned close and said in Navajo, "The cowboy, Yates, he looks at you the way my father looks at my mother, with soft eyes and a heart that wants to speak but does not know if it should." Penelope felt her cheeks flame. "We are friends, teacher and student." "If you say so," Pretty Moon said with a knowing smile. "But I think you look at him the same way, even if you have not admitted it yet." As the afternoon wore into evening, Yates asked Penelope to walk with him along the creek that ran through the canyon. They strolled in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water burble over smooth stones. Finally, Yates stopped and turned to face her. "Penelope, I need to say something, and I hope it will not make things awkward between us." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I have been teaching you Navajo for 4 months now, and somewhere along the way, teaching stopped being the only reason I looked forward to our evenings together." He took off his hat, turning it in his hands the way he did when he was nervous. "I've come to care for you more than I should maybe, more than is wise for a cowboy with nothing but a horse and a good reputation." Penelope stared at him, joy and fear warring in her chest. "Yates, You do not have to say anything right now," he interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know. I have been falling in love with you, Penelope Kincaid, falling in love with your determination and your kindness and the way you see the good in people no matter where they come from. If you do not feel the same, I will understand, and we can go on being friends. But if there is any chance that you might feel something too, I would like permission to court you properly." "I do feel the same," Penelope said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have for weeks now, but I thought you just saw me as a student, someone you were helping out of kindness." Relief and happiness transformed Yates's face. He reached for her hand, holding it carefully as if she were something precious and fragile. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and sweet, a promise of more to come. Penelope felt fireworks burst behind her closed eyelids, felt the world tilt and resettle into a new configuration where Yates Ashford was at the center of everything. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I have wanted to do that for so long," Yates admitted. "Then you should do it again," Penelope suggested. He did, and this time the kiss was deeper, more certain. When they finally walked back to the gathering, hand in hand, Pretty Moon took one look at their joined hands and their radiant faces and let out a whoop of approval that made several people turn and stare. She said something in rapid Navajo that made Yates laugh. "What did she say?" Penelope asked. She said it was about time, and now you can stop making moon eyes at each other during Navajo lessons. The ride back to Canyon Springs the next day felt entirely different than the ride out had. Penelope rode beside Yates with her heart singing, everything brighter and more beautiful because she was seeing it through the lens of new love. They talked about the future, about dreams and possibilities. Yates told her he had been saving money with the goal of buying his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise cattle and horses. "I would want it to be on land that borders Navajo territory," he said. "Somewhere I could maintain the friendships I have built and maybe help keep peace between the different communities. The bar tea is fine for now, but it is not mine, and the owner has some views on natives that I do not share." "That sounds wonderful," Penelope said. "A place of your own, where you can live according to your principles." "A place of our own, maybe," Yates corrected gently. "If you think you could be happy on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a cowboy who speaks better Navajo than fancy English." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest. "I think I could be very happy with that." When they reached Canyon Springs, Yates helped her down from her horse and then, right there in front of the mercantile where anyone could see, he kissed her again. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway and shook her head with a smile. "About time you two figured out what everyone else could see plain as day," she called. The next months were the happiest Penelope had ever known. Yates courted her with old-fashioned propriety, taking her on chaperoned picnics and visiting in the mercantile where Mrs. Henderson could keep an eye on them. But they also continued their Navajo lessons, and those evening sessions had a new intimacy now that they had declared their feelings. Yates would hold her hand as he explained grammar, or steal a kiss between vocabulary drills, and Penelope would laugh and push him away, then pull him back for another kiss. Pretty Moon became a regular visitor to town, often staying for hours to talk with Penelope in their shared language. Through these conversations, Penelope learned more about Navajo culture and history, about the pain of the long walk and the struggle to maintain traditions in the face of constant pressure to assimilate. She also learned about Pretty Moon's own dreams. The young Navajo woman wanted to be a teacher, to help her people preserve their language and stories for future generations. "The white schools, they try to make our children forget Navajo, forget who they are," Pretty Moon told her one afternoon as they sat outside the mercantile. "But if we do not teach our language to the young ones, it will die. And if the language dies, our whole way of seeing the world dies with it." "You would be an excellent teacher," Penelope said warmly. "You have already taught me so much." "You are easy to teach because you want to learn, because you see value in knowing our ways." Pretty Moon was quiet for a moment. "Yates is the same. He is a good man, Penelope. He sees us as people, not as problems to be solved or obstacles to be removed. That is rare among white men." In September, trouble came to Canyon Springs in the form of a territorial surveyor and a team of armed men. They rode into town one morning, carrying maps and legal documents that declared a new boundary line for the Navajo reservation. The line had been moved 20 miles east, which meant several Navajo families, including Pretty Moon's, would be forced to relocate or face arrest for trespassing on federal land. The news spread quickly, and by afternoon, tensions were running high. A group of angry settlers gathered in front of the saloon, demanding that the sheriff enforce the new boundaries immediately. Another group, mostly consisting of traders who did business with the Navajo, argued that the families should be given time to move their hogans and livestock. Yates and Penelope stood with the traders, their voices adding to the calls for reason and compassion. "Those people have been living on that land for generations," Yates argued, facing down a red-faced miner who wanted the Navajo gone immediately. Moving takes time, and doing it wrong could mean dead livestock and starving families come winter. "They are Indians, Ashford," the miner spat. "They do not own nothing, and they got no rights to delay when the government says move." Yates's jaw tightened dangerously. "They are human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. If you cannot see that, then you are the one with the problem, not them." The miner took a step forward, his fists clenched, but the sheriff intervened before violence could erupt. "All right, that is enough. Everyone go home and cool down. The surveyor says the Navajo families have 3 months to relocate. That is what the law allows, and that is what will happen. 3 months." It was better than nothing, but it was still a harsh sentence for families who would have to dismantle their lives and start over in unfamiliar territory. That evening, Yates and Penelope rode out to Pretty Moon's hogan to deliver the news in person. They found the family gathered around a fire, already having heard rumors of the new boundaries. Pretty Moon's father, who Penelope had learned was called Red Clay Singer, listened carefully as Yates explained the situation in Navajo. His weathered face remained impassive, but Penelope could see the pain in his eyes. He spoke at length, his words heavy with frustration and resignation. "He says they will move because they have no choice," Yates translated. "But he wants you to know that this land holds his ancestors' bones, and leaving it is like cutting away a part of his soul. He says he is tired of running, tired of watching his world shrink year by year." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "Ask him if there is anything we can do to help." Red Clay Singer regarded her thoughtfully when Yates translated, then spoke again. "He says your friendship is help enough, that knowing there are white people who see his family as equals gives him hope for his grandchildren's future. But he also says if you truly want to help, you can bear witness. Tell other white people what happens when families are forced to move with no regard for their needs or their history. Make them understand that the Navajo are not enemies or obstacles, but neighbors who want only to live in peace." "I will," Penelope promised in Navajo. "I will tell your story to anyone who will listen." Over the following weeks, Yates and Penelope helped several Navajo families prepare for the forced relocation. They transported goods to the new settlement area, helped dismantle hogans and rebuild them on the designated land, and ensured that flocks of sheep were moved safely to new grazing areas. It was exhausting work, made harder by the looming deadline and the knowledge that this forced migration was fundamentally unjust. Pretty Moon worked tirelessly alongside them, her usual bright spirit dimmed by sadness and anger. One evening, as she and Penelope packed up her family's belongings, she said in English, "I hate them sometimes. The white people who make these laws, who see us as nothing but problems to be moved around like game pieces. I know I should not hate, that it poisons the heart, but I cannot help it." "Hate is a natural response to injustice," Penelope said gently. "You do not have to pretend everything is fine when it is not. But you are white, and Yates is white, and you are helping us, so maybe not all white people are enemies." Pretty Moon's dark eyes were troubled. "It is confusing, being angry at a group of people while also caring for individuals within that group." "The world is complicated," Penelope agreed. "People are complicated. All we can do is try to see each person as an individual and treat them with the dignity they deserve." By late November, the relocation was complete. Pretty Moon's family and 6 others had rebuilt their hogans in the new designated area, a windswept stretch of land with less water and poorer soil than what they had left behind. It was survivable, but it was a step down in every measurable way. Red Clay Singer had aged visibly over the 3 months. the weight of loss etched in new lines around his eyes and mouth. On a cold December day, Yates arrived at the mercantile with news that made Penelope's heart leap. The Bar T is selling off some land, 1,000 acres on the northern boundary. It borders the new Navajo settlement area. I have enough saved to make an offer, and the owner says he will sell to me if I can come up with the money by the end of the year. That is wonderful. Penelope threw her arms around his neck, forgetting propriety in her excitement. You will finally have your own ranch, our ranch if you will have me. Yates pulled back to look at her seriously. Penelope Kincaid, I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your courage and your compassion and the way you throw yourself into learning without holding back. Will you marry me? Will you come build a life on that ranch? Help me create a place where people from different worlds can meet as friends instead of strangers. Tears streamed down Penelope's face, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Mrs. Henderson had to clear her throat loudly 3 times before they remembered they were standing in the middle of the mercantile with customers watching. They were married in January of 1878, in a ceremony that reflected both their backgrounds and their shared future. A circuit preacher performed the Christian service, but they also asked Red Clay Singer to conduct a Navajo blessing. Pretty Moon stood as Penelope's attendant, wearing a traditional velvet blouse and silver jewelry, while Yates's foreman from the Bar T served as his witness. The small gathering included Mrs. Henderson, several ranch hands, and a dozen Navajo families who had become dear friends over the past year. After the ceremony, Pretty Moon hugged Penelope tightly and whispered in Navajo, "You have become my sister in all the ways that matter. May your path be beautiful, and may you have many healthy children." "Ahehi, my sister," Penelope replied, using the word for sister that signified chosen family rather than blood relation. "You have given me so much." Yates and Penelope moved to their new ranch, which they named the Cottonwood after the grove of trees that grew near the main house. It was a modest operation at first, just a small herd of cattle and a few horses, but it was theirs. They built a simple ranch house with 2 rooms and a covered porch, and they dug a well that produced sweet, cold water even in the summer heat. True to their vision, the Cottonwood became a meeting place between cultures. Navajo families would stop by to trade goods or share news, and Yates hired several young Navajo men as ranch hands, paying them fair wages and treating them as equals. Penelope continued to study the language, becoming fluent enough to help translate during disputes or negotiations. She also started teaching English to Navajo children whose families wanted them to learn, always emphasizing that knowing English did not mean forgetting Navajo, that a person could move between worlds without losing themselves. Pretty Moon visited often, sometimes staying for days at a time. She and Penelope would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking in Navajo and English, code switching seamlessly as they shared stories and dreams. Pretty Moon had begun teaching Navajo to children in the new settlement, gathering them under a ramada and drilling them on vocabulary and traditional stories. It was informal and without government sanction, but it was important work that gave the community hope. In the spring of 1879, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. Yates was thrilled, though also nervous about bringing a child into their sometimes difficult world, but Penelope felt nothing but joy. She wanted to raise children who would see the beauty in all cultures, who would speak both English and Navajo and understand that difference was something to celebrate rather than fear. Their son was born in November of 1879, a healthy baby with his father's creek water eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. They named him Thomas, after Yates's brother who had died in the war, but they also gave him a Navajo name. Red Clay Singer performed a blessing ceremony when the baby was 8 days old, and he declared that the child should be called Bridge Builder, for he would be someone who connected different peoples and helped them understand one another. Pretty Moon became like an aunt to young Thomas, holding him and singing Navajo lullabies that had been passed down through generations. She told him stories in both languages as he grew, teaching him about Coyote the trickster and the hero twins, about the creation of the Navajo people and their journey through different worlds. The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep satisfaction. The Cottonwood Ranch grew steadily, and Yates developed a reputation as a fair dealer who could negotiate with both Navajo herders and white ranchers. Penelope's skill with languages made her invaluable during disputes, and she often served as an unofficial mediator when tensions arose. In 1882, Penelope gave birth to twin daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. The girls were born during a spring thunderstorm, and Red Clay Singer declared they would be called Storm Bringers, for they had arrived with the blessed rain. The twins grew up speaking Navajo and English interchangeably, playing with both white and Navajo children, completely comfortable in both worlds. Not everyone approved of how Yates and Penelope were raising their children. Some white settlers criticized them for allowing their kids to speak a native language and learn native customs. But Yates and Penelope stood firm in their beliefs. They knew their children were being given something precious, a broader understanding of the world and a genuine respect for all people. Pretty Moon married in 1883 to a young Navajo man named Strong Horse, who shared her passion for preserving their language and culture. Penelope stood with Pretty Moon during her traditional Navajo wedding ceremony, understanding every word of the songs and prayers. It was a full-circle moment, reflecting how far both women had come since that frightening afternoon outside the trading post so many years before. In 1885, another son was born to Yates and Penelope. They named him Jacob, and his Navajo name was Peace Walker. He was a calm, thoughtful child from the beginning, content to watch the world with wise eyes that seemed too old for his young face. As the children grew, Penelope started a small school on the ranch, teaching not just her own children but also any Navajo or white kids whose parents wanted them to learn. She taught reading, writing, and arithmetic in English, but she also taught Navajo language and culture with Pretty Moon's help. It was an unusual arrangement, one that raised eyebrows in Canyon Springs, but parents on both sides saw the value of children learning to respect and understand each other. The 1880s were a time of continued change and challenge in the Arizona Territory. The railroad came through, bringing more settlers and more pressure on native lands. But the Cottonwood Ranch remained a small oasis of cooperation and mutual respect, proof that different cultures could coexist peacefully when people approached each other with open hearts and minds. Yates and Penelope celebrated their 10th anniversary in January of 1888. They had a quiet dinner on the porch of their now expanded ranch house, watching the sun set over the red rocks while their children played in the yard. Thomas was 8 now, tall and confident, already helping with ranch work. The twins were 5, wild and energetic and full of questions. Little Jacob was 2, toddling around and chattering in a mixture of English and Navajo that made everyone smile. "Did you ever imagine this when you first came west?" Yates asked, pulling Penelope close against his side. "Never," she admitted. "I thought I was just running away from grief and loss, looking for a fresh start. I had no idea I would find a whole new world, a whole new understanding of what it means to be human and connected to others." The Navajo have a concept called haja, Yates said thoughtfully. It means beauty, harmony, balance. Walking in beauty means living in balance with the world and with other people, treating everyone and everything with respect. I think we have built something that reflects haja here on the cottonwood. Penelope tilted her face up to kiss him. We have built it together, with Pretty Moon and her family, with Red Clay Singer and all the others who believed that peace was possible. It has not always been easy, but it has always been worth it. That night, after the children were asleep, and the ranch was quiet except for the distant howl of coyotes, Penelope and Yates lay in bed talking about the future. They dreamed of expanding the school, of building formal bridges between Navajo and white communities, of raising their children to carry on the work they had started. It was an ambitious dream, but they had already achieved so much that once seemed impossible. In 1890, Pretty Moon gave birth to her first child, a daughter she named Sarah in English and Laughing Water in Navajo. Penelope traveled to the Navajo settlement to help with the birth, drawing on knowledge she had learned from Navajo midwives over the years. Holding Pretty Moon's hand as she labored, coaching her through contractions in Navajo, Penelope felt the full weight of their friendship, the depth of the bond they had forged across cultural divides. "You are my sister," Pretty Moon gasped between contractions. "My true sister of the heart." "And you are mine," Penelope replied, wiping sweat from her friend's brow. "Always and forever, no matter what comes." When little Sarah was born, healthy and squalling, Red Clay Singer performed the same blessing ceremony he had done for Penelope's children. Looking at the tiny baby in Pretty Moon's arms, surrounded by family from two cultures, Penelope felt profound hope for the future. These children, raised with respect for all people, would build a better world than the one their parents had inherited. The 1890s brought continued growth for the Cottonwood Ranch. Yates expanded the cattle operation and added horses, breeding sturdy Mustangs that could handle the rough desert terrain. Penelope's school grew to include nearly 30 students, both Navajo and white, and she hired 2 more teachers to help manage the workload. Pretty Moon taught Navajo language and culture, while a young woman from Canyon Springs named Miss Davis handled arithmetic and science. Thomas turned 18 in 1897 and declared his intention to become a lawyer. He wanted to fight for Native rights in the courts, to use the white man's legal system to protect Navajo interests. Yates and Penelope were proud of his ambition, though they worried about the challenges he would face. Still, they encouraged him to follow his dreams, knowing that change often came from unexpected places. The twins, Mary and Elizabeth, were very different from each other despite being born minutes apart. Mary wanted to be a doctor, fascinated by medicine and healing. Elizabeth dreamed of being a writer, documenting the stories and histories of the Navajo people before they were lost. Both were fiercely intelligent and determined, true daughters of their parents. Jacob, at 12, was already showing signs of being a natural mediator. He had his father's calm demeanor and his mother's gift for languages, and he seemed able to move between different groups with ease, making everyone feel heard and respected. Red Clay Singer said the boy would be a great leader someday, someone who could unite diverse people around common goals. In 1899, Red Clay Singer died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. His passing was mourned by both Navajo and white communities, for he had been a bridge between worlds, a man of wisdom and patience who had worked tirelessly for peace. Yates and Penelope attended his funeral, a 4-day ceremony that honored his life and his contributions to his people. Pretty Moon, now a respected teacher and leader in her own right, delivered a eulogy in Navajo that brought tears to every eye. After the ceremony, Pretty Moon came to stay at the cottonwood for a week, needing the comfort of her chosen sister. She and Penelope sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset and remembering the man who had welcomed Penelope into his family all those years ago. "He loved you like a daughter," Pretty Moon said softly in Navajo. "He told me once that you had a Navajo heart, that you understood our ways better than some who were born to them." "He taught me so much," Penelope replied, her throat tight with grief. "About respecting the land, about seeing the sacred in ordinary things, about being patient and kind even when the world seems determined to be cruel." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, bound by shared memories and shared loss. Finally, Pretty Moon said, "My father made me promise something before he died. He made me promise to keep teaching the language, keep sharing the stories. He was afraid that in a generation or two, all of this would be forgotten, that our children's children would speak only English and know nothing of where they came from. We will not let that happen," Penelope vowed. "The school will keep teaching Navajo, and we will make sure every child knows the stories and the traditions. Your father's legacy will live on." As the new century dawned in 1900, Yates and Penelope were in their early 50s, their hair graying but their spirits still strong. The Cottonwood Ranch was now one of the most successful operations in the territory, known not just for its quality livestock, but for its progressive approach to relations between different communities. The school had earned a reputation as well, with parents from as far as 50 miles away sending their children to learn in an environment that valued multiple cultures and languages. Thomas had gone east to study law at a university in New York, writing long letters home about his experiences and his determination to return west and fight for justice. Mary was studying medicine with a doctor in Tucson, preparing to open a practice that would serve both white and Navajo patients. Elizabeth was working on a book documenting Navajo history and culture, conducting interviews with elders and recording stories that might otherwise be lost. Jacob, now 17, was helping run the ranch and showing a natural talent for diplomacy and negotiation. One evening in early spring, Yates and Penelope walked hand in hand to the top of a small rise that overlooked their land. From here, they could see the ranch house with smoke curling from the chimney, the barns and corrals, the small schoolhouse where tomorrow's lessons were already planned. In the distance, they could see the glow of fires from the Navajo settlement, and they knew that Pretty Moon was probably sitting with her family, telling her grandchildren stories in the same musical language that Penelope had worked so hard to learn all those years ago. "Do you remember the first day we met?" Yates asked, pulling Penelope close. "I saw this dusty, frightened woman and thought I would help her find her way back to town. I had no idea I was meeting the love of my life. I saw a quiet cowboy who seemed to care about everyone equally, and I thought he was just being kind," Penelope replied with a smile. "I had no idea he would change everything about how I saw the world." "You learned my language," Yates said softly, using the Navajo phrase that could mean both literal language and cultural understanding. "You learned it better than I ever expected, better than most people born to it. You opened your heart to a whole different way of seeing and being, and you never looked back. You taught me that language is more than words," Penelope countered. "It is a window into a whole worldview, a way of connecting with people at the deepest level. Learning Navajo taught me patience and humility and respect. It taught me to listen with my whole being, not just my ears." They stood there as darkness fell, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast sky overhead. Behind them, they heard laughter from the house as their youngest, Jacob, called them in for dinner. Ahead of them stretched the land they had worked so hard to care for, land that held the hopes and dreams of multiple generations and cultures. "We built something good here," Yates said finally. "Something that will outlast us." "We built it together," Penelope corrected. "You and me, Pretty Moon and her family, all the people who believed that understanding was more powerful than fear. That is the legacy I want to leave, the knowledge that people from different worlds can come together and create something beautiful." They walked back to the house together, their steps perfectly matched after more than 20 years of walking side by side. Inside, their family waited along with Pretty Moon and her husband and children, all gathered for a meal that would include both traditional Navajo dishes and American frontier cooking, conversation flowing seamlessly between two languages, two ways of seeing the world united in friendship and love. In the years that followed, the Cottonwood Ranch continued to thrive. Thomas returned from law school and opened a practice in Tucson, taking on cases that defended Navajo rights and challenged unjust laws. Mary became a beloved doctor, known for combining traditional Navajo healing practices with modern medicine. Elizabeth published her book in 1908 to critical acclaim, helping to preserve Navajo stories and culture for future generations. Jacob took over management of the ranch from his father, running it with the same principles of respect and cooperation that Yates and Penelope had established. Pretty Moon continued teaching until she was well into her 70s, training younger teachers to carry on the work of preserving the Navajo language. She and Penelope remained best friends until the end, sisters of the heart who had bridged two worlds through courage, determination, and love. Yates and Penelope celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in January of 1928, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who represented the blending of cultures they had worked so hard to achieve. They sat on the porch of the ranch house, now much expanded from the simple two-room structure they had started with, and reflected on the journey they had taken together. "I have been thinking about that first Navajo lesson you gave me," Penelope said, her hair now silver but her eyes still bright with intelligence and warmth. "You told me that language was like anything else worth doing, that it took time and patience. And you proved me right by learning faster than almost anyone I ever taught," Yates replied with a smile. "You had the dedication and the heart for it." "I had the right teacher," Penelope said softly, "and the right reason. I wanted to thank Pretty Moon in her own words, and I wanted to understand the people who lived on this land. But somewhere along the way, it became about so much more. It became about building a life that honored all the different parts of who we are, native and white, old traditions and new possibilities." "Haja," Yates said in Navajo. "We walked in beauty together." "We did," Penelope agreed, taking his weathered hand in hers. "And we taught our children to walk in beauty too. That is the greatest gift we could have given them." As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, Yates and Penelope sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of family and friends sharing stories in two languages. They had started with nothing but determination and hope. A cowboy learning Navajo and teaching it to a woman from Philadelphia who wanted to bridge the gap between cultures. From that simple beginning, they had built something lasting and beautiful, proof that love and understanding could overcome any divide. Pretty Moon approached with her youngest granddaughter, a bright-eyed child of 6 named Morning Star. The little girl climbed into Penelope's lap and asked in perfect Navajo, "Great Auntie, will you tell me the story of how you learned our language?" Penelope smiled and hugged the child close. "Once upon a time," she began in Navajo, "there was a young woman who came from very far away. She did not understand the desert or its people, and she was frightened and alone. But then she met a brave woman who helped her, and a kind cowboy who taught her that words are bridges that connect hearts across any distance. And she learned that the most important journey a person can take is the journey toward understanding someone different from themselves. Morning Star listened with rapt attention as Penelope continued the story, telling her about the first halting words of Navajo, the patient lessons under the desert sun, the growing friendship with Pretty Moon, and the love that had blossomed between a cowboy and a woman from the East. It was a story that had been told many times over the years, but it never lost its power, for it was a story about courage and connection, about choosing to see the humanity in all people regardless of where they came from or what language they spoke. When the story ended, Morning Star hugged Penelope tightly and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to learn lots of languages and help people understand each other." "Then that is what you will do," Penelope assured her, "and the world will be better for it." As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Yates and Penelope remained on the porch, unwilling to let go of the perfect day. They had been blessed beyond measure, given a life filled with purpose and love, surrounded by family and friends who embodied the best of both cultures. The Cottonwood Ranch had become exactly what they had dreamed it could be. A place where people from different worlds came together in friendship and mutual respect, where children grew up speaking multiple languages and honoring multiple traditions, where the walls between us and them had been replaced by the simple recognition of our shared humanity. "I love you," Yates said quietly, the same words he had spoken to her beside a creek in a canyon 50 years before. "I have loved you every day since I first saw you, and I will love you every day until my last breath." "And I love you," Penelope replied, her voice steady and sure. "You gave me a new language and a new life. You showed me that home is not a place but a choice, the choice to stand with certain people and build something meaningful together. Everything I am, everything we have created, began with that choice and that love." They sat together as the stars emerged, the same vast canopy of stars they had watched on their first night camping in the desert all those decades ago. The world had changed in countless ways since then. The Arizona Territory had become a state, new technologies had transformed daily life, and the frontier had slowly been tamed. But the fundamental truth remained unchanged. Love and understanding could bridge any divide, and a life lived in service of connection and respect was a life well lived. In the years that followed their anniversary, Yates and Penelope gradually stepped back from daily ranch operations, content to let their children and grandchildren carry on the work they had started. They spent their days tending a garden, reading to great-grandchildren, and enjoying the peace they had earned through decades of hard work. Pretty Moon visited almost daily, and the two women could often be found on the porch, speaking in Navajo and laughing like the young women they had been so long ago. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 80. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people from both white and Navajo communities, all coming to pay respects to a man who had lived his principles and treated everyone with dignity and fairness. He was buried on a hill overlooking the Cottonwood Ranch, with both Christian and Navajo ceremonies honoring his passing. Penelope mourned deeply, but found comfort in the legacy they had built together and in the family that surrounded her with love. She continued to teach occasional classes in Navajo at the school, now run by her granddaughter, and she worked with Elizabeth to preserve more stories and traditions for future generations. Pretty Moon remained her constant companion, and they supported each other through the challenges of aging and loss. On a warm spring morning in 1935, Penelope sat on the porch with Pretty Moon, watching great-great-grandchildren play in the yard. The children were a beautiful mix of backgrounds and features, speaking English and Navajo interchangeably, completely at ease with their complex heritage. It was everything Penelope had dreamed of when she first decided to learn Navajo all those years ago, proof that different cultures could not just coexist but enrich each other. "We did it," Pretty Moon said softly in Navajo. "We kept the language alive. We kept the stories alive. Our children's children know who they are and where they come from." "We did it together," Penelope replied, squeezing her friend's hand. "You and me, Yates and your father and all the others who believed it was possible. We built bridges instead of walls." That evening, Penelope felt unusually tired and went to bed early. She fell asleep thinking about Yates, about the life they had shared, about the cowboy who had learned Navajo and taught it to her with such patience and love. She dreamed of their first kiss beside a creek, of the way his creek water eyes had looked at her with such tenderness, of all the years of partnership and devotion that had followed. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, her heart simply deciding it was time to rest. Her funeral rivaled Yates's in size and scope, with people traveling from across the state to honor the woman who had dedicated her life to building understanding between cultures. She was buried beside Yates on the hill overlooking the ranch, and both Christian and Navajo blessings were spoken over her grave. Pretty Moon stood at the grave site and spoke in Navajo, her aged voice still strong and clear. "My sister of the heart, you came to this land as a stranger and made it your home. You learned our language not just with your mind but with your spirit. You saw us as people, as friends, as equals. You raised children who walk in beauty between two worlds. Your legacy will live forever in the stories we tell and in the bridges you helped us build. May your path be beautiful, my sister. May you walk in beauty always." The Cottonwood Ranch continued for many more generations, always maintaining the principles of respect and cooperation that Yates and Penelope had established. The school grew into a respected institution that taught multiple languages and honored multiple cultures. The descendants of Pretty Moon and the descendants of Yates and Penelope remained close, united by bonds of friendship and shared history that transcended cultural boundaries. In the end, the story of Yates Ashford and Penelope Kincaid became a legend in the region, told and retold as an example of what was possible when people approached each other with open hearts and minds. It was a story about a cowboy who learned Navajo and taught it to the woman he loved, about two cultures coming together in friendship and respect, about the power of language to bridge divides and create understanding. It was a love story, yes, but it was also more than that. It was a testament to the human capacity for growth and connection, proof that we are all capable of learning new ways of seeing the world if we are willing to put in the time and effort. It was a story of beauty and harmony, of walking in Haja together, and it would be remembered for as long as there were people to tell it.